Let's talk about the dark, twisted reality hiding inside Tinseltown's most legendary wardrobes. Think about those ruby red slippers, the metallic skin of the Tin Man, or that white dress flying up on a subway grate. These aren't just outfits, they are the very fabric of Hollywood's golden age images burned into our collective memory. But if you strip away the glitz, there is a secret underneath every stitch that is so messed up it will make you rethink every classic movie you ever loved. I'm talking about horror stories, like how the original Tin Man suit was basically a death trap that poisoned the actor until his lungs failed and he hit the floor, gasping. Or how Marilyn Monroe's most legendary fashion moment didn't just make history, it nuked her marriage and left her feeling used and cheapened for the rest of her life. The reality is that the most beloved looks in cinema history were stitched together with physical torture, financial destruction, and massive coordinated cover-ups. For decades, we have been praising these costumes as works of genius art and design, completely oblivious to the truth. Meanwhile, the studio system kept a tight lid on the devastating human toll paid for every single sequin and tailored silhouette. Let's be real, some of these iconic moments were achieved through methods so hazardous and predatory, and so totally heartless toward human suffering, that if they tried it in 2026, everyone involved would be facing serious jail time. But we are about to expose what actually went down once the director yelled "cut" and the wardrobe department locked up for the night. Buckle up, because what you are about to learn is going to permanently alter the way you watch these vintage classics. These big studios weren't just in the business of making dreams, they were manufacturing living nightmares, one outfit at a time. So let's rip off the bandage and expose Hollywood's dirtiest wardrobe secrets. The Golden Age ran on a simple, ruthless motto. The show must go on, and they did not give a damn about the cost to human life, health, or personal dignity. Those costume shops were not just creative little art studios where magic happened. They were basically exploitation labs where designers and stars were forced into contact with toxic materials and grueling conditions that would make a modern OSHA inspector faint. MGM, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers don't think of them as just movie studios. Think of them as massive industrial machines that chewed up human beings and spit out cinematic gold fueled by suffering. These places operated like secret societies, slapping workers with gag orders and non-disclosure agreements to ensure nobody ever talked. They had studio doctors on payroll whose job wasn't to cure you but to hide the damage, while actors who spoke up were threatened with being blacklisted forever. And the sickest part, the most famous, widely adored costumes in history were usually the ones that demanded the highest blood price from the people wearing them. It was a twisted equation. The more toxic the material and the more painful the fit, the more legendary the look became on screen. We have been unwitting accomplices in this cruelty for a century, oohing and ahing at movie magic while the victims suffered in silence. The studio playbook was always exactly the same, rinse and repeat. Put the aesthetic above everything. Ignore the safety hazards, bury the medical reports, and when a star collapses, blame their weak constitution instead of the poison you painted on them. But you can't bury the truth forever. It always claws its way to the surface, eventually. Now, these wardrobe horror stories are exposing the actual price tag attached to that old school Hollywood glamour. We are talking about makeup so poisonous it filled lungs with metal shards, and corsets so tight actors had to be literally cut out of them just to breathe between scenes. From body paint that sealed pores and suffocated the skin to outfits so heavy they resulted in permanent spinal injuries. These weren't oops moments or unfortunate accidents. These were cold, calculated decisions by power players who valued a perfect shot more than a human life. Let me break it down for you and show you exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. We are kicking this off with one of the most cherished movies in American history and how it almost murdered its own cast. Story number 1, The Wizard of Oz. A literal toxic death trap. The Wizard of Oz is basically the holy grail of family cinema. But strip away the Technicolor joy and you find a catalogue of costume-related disasters that prove just how ruthless the MGM machine really was. This was not a one-off incident or a single bad day on set. It was the systematic poisoning of the talent signed off by executives who knew the risks and chose the box office returns over the people making the movie. The first casualty was Buddy Ebsen, the guy originally hired to play the Tin Man. The makeup team had a major problem to solve. How do you turn a flesh and blood man into a metal robot? Their genius idea was to take pure aluminum powder, mix it into a paste and shellac Ebsen's face with it every single morning. Sure, that metallic cocktail created an amazing silver shine that popped under the bright studio lights. But here is the science they ignored. When aluminum powder dries, it turns into airborne dust that you inhale, coating your lungs like millions of microscopic razor blades. For 10 straight days, Ebsen sat in that chair while artists painted him into a metallic coffin. Every breath he took pulled more of that aluminum dust into his body. Every day, his respiratory system was getting clogged with metal. By the 10th day of production, Buddy Ebsen hit the floor on set, completely unable to draw a breath, his lungs failing. His lungs were practically coated in aluminum dust, leading to a diagnosis of acute aluminum poisoning, a horrifying condition that was literally suffocating him from the inside out. Ebsen was rushed to the emergency room in critical condition, where he spent weeks battling for his life, while the medical team frantically worked to scrub the toxic metallic particles from his respiratory system. But this is where the story gets dark, and MGM's institutional cruelty really shows its true colours. They didn't bother to visit Ebsen in the hospital, and you can bet they didn't offer to pay a dime of his mounting medical bills. Instead, the studio PR machine went into overdrive, spinning a fake narrative that Ebsen had simply suffered a minor allergic reaction to some makeup, rewriting history to make it look like his body was the problem. Rather than owning up to the fact that their costume department had systematically poisoned their leading man, they chose to deflect the blame entirely. While Ebsen was lying in a hospital bed fighting to breathe, MGM didn't waste a second. They were already in the process of recasting his role. They brought in Jack Haley and tweaked the makeup formula to an aluminum paste that was claimed to be safer, even though Haley still dealt with serious lung infections throughout the production. The twisted irony in all of this is that Ebsen had already laid down his vocals for the song We're Off to See the Wizard. If you crank up the volume and listen closely to the final cut of the film, you can actually still hear traces of Buddy Ebsen's voice in the mix. It is blended right in with Jack Haley's, serving as a ghostly echo of the man who almost died for that tin suit. But the Tin Man's near-fatal poisoning was really just the tip of the iceberg when it came to Oz's toxic legacy. Remember that iconic poppy field scene where Dorothy and the gang pass out among the flowers and get woken up by falling snow? That wasn't snow, it was pure industrial-grade asbestos. MGM literally blanketed Judy Garland, Ray Bolger, Jack Haley and Burt Lahr in a substance that we now know is a direct cause of mesothelioma lung cancer and asbestosis. The absolute negligence and criminal aspect of this production decision cannot be overstated. By 1939, medical journals had already established clear links between asbestos exposure and severe life-threatening lung diseases. MGM had access to plenty of safer alternatives like cotton batting or soap flakes, but asbestos was cheaper and it looked better on camera, so they went with the poison. They made a cold, calculated decision to expose their biggest stars to a known carcinogen just to save a few bucks and get a perfect visual shot. Some health experts and biographers have speculated for years that Judy Garland's lifelong respiratory struggles actually started right there. These issues likely began on the set of Oz and could have been directly connected to that massive asbestos exposure during the snow scene. Of course, her well-documented battle with studio-mandated amphetamines and those grueling 18-hour workdays were certainly major factors in destroying her health. But what is undeniable is that when Garland started experiencing trouble breathing during the production, the studio didn't help her. Studio doctors blew it off as just nerves and exhaustion, pumping her full of amphetamines to keep her dancing and barbiturates to knock her out at night. Then you have the Cowardly Lion's costume, which was a nightmare straight out of a horror movie. Burt Lahr was trapped inside a suit made from real lion skins that weighed over 50 pounds. Under those intense Technicolor studio lights, that suit became a literal furnace, causing Lahr to pass out from heat exhaustion on a regular basis. The harsh chemical preservatives used to cure the pelts ate away at his skin, leaving Lar with permanent scarring and chronic dermatitis that plagued him for years after the movie wrapped. Margaret Hamilton, the Wicked Witch, didn't fare much better. She suffered severe third-degree burns. Her copper-based green face paint actually caught fire during the special effects sequence for her broomstick exit. The makeup contained toxic copper compounds that didn't just burn her skin. They seeped into her bloodstream, poisoning her through the open wounds. MGM's response was classic Hollywood spin. Instead of fixing the dangerous conditions, they hired a publicist to frame the story as a brave actress soldiering on despite her injuries. There have been persistent rumours swirling around Hollywood for decades that the Scarecrow's costume was stuffed with hay treated with chemicals. It was allegedly soaked in pesticides and flame retardants, causing agonising skin rashes and respiratory irritation for the actor. While those specific claims remain unverified by the history books, the famous ruby slippers were definitely part of MGM's cover-up operation. There have long been whispers that the studio quietly destroyed several pairs of the shoes that showed visible dust or asbestos residue. Although we don't have the smoking gun evidence that proves the destruction happened, the rumours have never gone away. What is documented is that several pairs mysteriously vanished from MGM's archives, and the ones left standing were scrubbed so clean that any evidence of that toxic snow was wiped from existence. The human toll of The Wizard of Oz extended way beyond the names on the marquee. Dozens of extras, background dancers and munchkin actors were breathing in that same toxic junk day after day. Many of them developed serious health problems they couldn't afford to fix because MGM's insurance conveniently claimed it didn't cover pre-existing conditions. That was a category that the studio used to conveniently include any and all chemical exposures that happened during their productions. When Judy Garland passed away in 1969 at just 47 years old from an accidental overdose, it was a tragedy. But those who knew the real story of the Oz filming understood that the seeds of her destruction were sown in that toxic wonderland MGM created 30 years prior. Buddy Ebsen survived, but he wheezed through lung problems for the rest of his life. It served as a constant painful reminder of those 10 days that nearly killed him in service of a children's movie. All right, let's dive into story number 2. The Goldfinger scandal, or what I like to call death by gold paint. Back in 1964, when Shirley Eaton got painted head to toe for Goldfinger, the result was one of the most twisted and iconic visuals in cinema history. But getting that killer golden sheen wasn't just movie magic. It nearly took the actress out and exposed just how reckless filmmakers could be to get the perfect shot, ignoring the human costs. The costume and makeup crews whipped up a custom toxic blend of metallic dust, heavy-duty shellac, and super fast-drying industrial adhesive to create that deadly golden finish you saw on the big screen. We aren't talking about body paint here. This was an industrial coating designed to seal Eaton's pores shut and form a hard, rigid shell around her entire body. The whole application process dragged on for over 6 hours, with technicians using brushes and sponges to painstakingly cover every single square inch of her skin while she stood totally frozen in a special booth. The shellac base was the scariest part. It's stuff made for finishing furniture, not human skin. It formed an airtight seal that basically stopped her skin from breathing. Stuck under those blazing hot studio lights, Eaton's body temperature started spiking dangerously because her natural cooling system was completely blocked off. That hard metallic shell made moving nearly impossible, and normal breathing became a serious struggle as the paint dried and started squeezing her torso like a vice. While the cameras rolled, Eaton was literally fighting for air inside that stiff metallic coffin encasing her body. The situation was so sketchy that the crew kept oxygen masks on standby, and between takes assistants were frantically using small fans to try and cool down her overheating body. The actress later said it felt like being trapped inside her own skin, unable to move naturally or breathe comfortably, while everyone just kept filming. The physical toll was instant and brutal. Underneath the gold, Eaton's skin turned raw and angry red as her body desperately tried to regulate heat through pores that were glued shut. The chemical mix in the paint triggered nasty allergic reactions that left her covered in painful welts and blistering. They actually had medics stationed right on set to watch her vitals because the risk of heat stroke and chemical poisoning was totally real. And if you think putting it on was bad, removing that gold coating was its own form of torture. They had to use repeated rounds of harsh industrial solvents, with every application burning Eaton's already damaged skin like acid. Crew members said she was in tears with every wipe because those chemicals weren't just stripping the paint, they were peeling off layers of her actual skin too. Cleaning her up took almost as long as painting her, leaving Eaton chemically burned and scarred by the time it was over. For years, there was this massive urban legend that Eaton actually died from skin suffocation after filming, but that's just a myth. She survived the nightmare, but honestly, it was a close call. Official crew logs show she walked away with mild to moderate chemical burns on her chest and arms, plus lasting anxiety about tight spaces and chemical exposure. That scene's dramatic impact was basically achieved through systematic torture disguised as Hollywood glamour. Eaton later described the whole thing as feeling like she was slowly being sealed into a tomb, totally unable to escape the golden prison that the costume department had built right on top of her skin. Despite the physical pain and the mental trauma, that image of her body became one of the most famous shots in the entire James Bond franchise, proving once again that in Tinseltown the most memorable moments usually come with a messed up human price tag. The Goldfinger incident became a huge cautionary tale in the industry about the dangers of using chemical coatings for practical effects, although it took years before they actually established real safety protocols to protect actors from going through that kind of hell again. Moving on to story number 3, Mae West and the cut-free or die drama. You know that famous hourglass figure, Mae West, rocked in movies like She Done Him Wrong? That wasn't just natural curves or good tailoring. That look was created through a type of systematic physical torture that nearly killed the legend on multiple occasions. West's signature style required custom steel-boned corsets laced so tight that film crews sometimes had to literally cut her out of them when she passed out cold. The corsets West wore were basically medical-grade restraint devices disguised as underwear built with solid steel bones and reinforced with metal clasps. They were designed to crush her ribcage down to an insane degree, creating that wasp waist she was famous for. Just getting into these things required 2 or 3 assistants heaving on the laces, pulling with so much force that West would be gasping, struggling to catch a single breath. The physical damage was immediate and severe. The extreme compression bruised West's ribs and back, leaving permanent marks that makeup artists had to cover up during fittings. Those corsets made deep breathing agonising and severely limited her movement on screen to tiny careful steps so she wouldn't risk cutting off her already compromised air supply. Behind the glamorous facade, West was dealing with constant fainting spells that threatened to shut down production on the regular. The dangerous mix of oxygen deprivation and the sheer crushing force exerted on her internal organs frequently caused her to black out completely. It happened enough that she would simply crumple into the waiting arms of her wardrobe team, who had become experts at spotting the subtle red flags before she hit the floor. On numerous scary occasions, the crew had to frantically grab scissors or specialised cutting gear to slice through the corset strings. If West couldn't draw a breath, they had to act fast, turning medical emergencies into just another Tuesday on the production schedule. Sadly, the long-term fallout for her health was absolutely catastrophic. Medical experts have since connected the dots, linking the extended use of such suffocating garments to severe musculoskeletal trauma, unending respiratory battles, and actual permanent reshaping of the ribcage. West's unwavering dedication to achieving that extreme hourglass silhouette demanded a brutal price, one paid directly with her physical well-being. Yet she managed to weaponise those forced curves, crafting a screen persona so dominating that it cemented her status as one of the highest paid icons in Tinseltown history. But here is the cruel twist: while the audience sat captivated by West's oozing confidence and commanding sexual energy, they were missing the truth. They never realised that every slow pause in her dialogue, every deliberate movement was actually dictated by her desperate need to catch a tiny breath. What the world interpreted as her signature swagger was, in reality, pure survival instinct kicking in. As she adapted to performing inside that vice grip, the corset evolved into both her trademark and her jail cell, establishing the legend while systematically destroying the woman inside. Even when the cameras stopped rolling, the damage didn't just disappear. Decades of extreme tight-lacing saddled West with chronic back agony and breathing complications that haunted her for the rest of her days. Story number 4. Marilyn Monroe's subway dress, a case study in calculated exploitation. That famous white halter from The 7-Year Itch stands as one of the darkest examples of Hollywood machinery engineered by powerful men who viewed Marilyn as a shiny asset rather than a human being. What the world remembers as a spontaneous burst of cinematic magic was in truth a carefully choreographed humiliation. It was a stunt that not only shattered Monroe's marriage but also inflicted deep-lasting psychological wounds. Let's be clear that costume was never designed for Marilyn's benefit. It was crafted solely to satisfy the male brass at 20th Century Fox, who had some very specific and creepy requirements for what they wanted the public to ogle. Studio bigwig Daryl Zanuck personally oversaw the design phase. He gave explicit orders to designer William Travilla to whip up something that pushed the envelope of exposure as far as possible without getting banned by the censors of the time. The initial script actually described a modest summer dress for that subway sequence. But Zanuck had zero interest in modest or simple. He demanded a visual spectacle, and he intended to serve up Monroe's body as the main attraction. The resulting white halter was practically engineered for exposure, stitched from a lightweight fabric that turned nearly see-through under the right lights and was cut to fly up aggressively the second air hit it. According to her acting coach, Natasha Lutece, Monroe was visibly distressed about how invasive and exploitative the shot was going to be. She actually tried to fight back, negotiating for a different outfit or a tweaked scene that wouldn't focus so heavily on putting her anatomy on display. The studio clapped back instantly and viciously. Fox executives reminded her that she was locked into a contract and any refusal to perform exactly as told would be considered a breach, potentially torching her entire career in an instant. The actual filming turned into a calculated exercise in harassment. Director Billy Wilder forced Marilyn to endure the scene dozens of times over several days, all while a massive crowd of male crew members, suits, and invited onlookers gathered to gawk. Every single time those massive wind machines roared to life and sent her dress skyward. The mob of men would hoot, whistle, and cheer, acting like they were front row at a private burlesque show rather than on a professional movie set. Darker Hollywood whispers suggest these sessions were even grimy than they appeared on surface level. Some accounts claim studio higher-ups actually invited their drinking buddies and business partners specifically to watch Monroe flash the crowd, twisting her professional work into private entertainment for the boys' club. While those specific allegations are hard to verify today, it is a documented fact that the subway shoot attracted an unusually massive swarm of male spectators who had absolutely zero business being on that set. Enter Joe DiMaggio, the baseball legend, who had tied the knot with Marilyn just a few months prior. He showed up unannounced at the New York location only to find his wife being systematically objectified while scores of men treated it like a free peep show. Multiple eyewitnesses stated that DiMaggio stood there in stunned, seething silence before finally blowing his top. He reportedly confronted Wilder and the Fox execs, raging about what he saw as the deliberate and shameful exploitation of his wife. The mental toll this took on Monroe was heavy, and it stuck with her. She later confessed to close friends and her coach that the subway ordeal was one of the most degrading moments of her entire professional life. She felt the dress wasn't designed to make her look elegant or beautiful, but rather to make her look vulnerable and readily available for consumption. The costume reduced her entire existence to a sexual object, and she knew deep down that millions of viewers would see that image and decide that was the only thing she was good for. There was simply no way the high-profile marriage between Monroe and Joltin' Joe could weather the absolute public shame of that specific moment. The power couple called it quits less than a year later, with DiMaggio eventually admitting he couldn't stomach watching his wife being systematically used for cheap thrills. She was trapped in an industry that viewed her as a piece of property on a balance sheet rather than a living, breathing human being. That famous white dress didn't just put Monroe's curves on display, it completely nuked her marriage and kicked off a cycle of loneliness that would haunt her for the rest of her tragic life. That subway great outfit turned into the ultimate symbol of everything toxic about how the old studio system chewed up and spit out its female talent. What the ticket-buying public hailed as iconic Hollywood glamour was, in reality, a documented case of workplace exploitation. It was all carefully orchestrated by powerful men who cashed in on Monroe's degradation while she was left footing the bill with her mental health. Moving on to story number 5, let's look at Star Wars and the absolute nightmare of Vader's torture chamber. When David Prowse signed on to play Darth Vader in the original trilogy, he basically signed up for daily physical abuse, masquerading as a wardrobe fitting. That legendary suit that turned Vader into cinema's ultimate bad guy was essentially a £25 torture rack that wrecked Prowse's body over years of production. Just the helmet by itself was a massive £5 weight that sat directly on Prowse's neck and shoulders all day long. It forced him to crane his head back at totally unnatural angles just to keep the thing balanced for hours on end. The relentless pressure triggered chronic neck agony and splitting migraines that didn't just vanish when the director yelled "cut." Then you had the full body armour moulded from fiberglass and heavy plastic, adding another 20 pounds of dead weight that killed his range of motion and made walking a workout. The costume design featured that famous chest control panel wired up with blinking LEDs to give Vader his signature sci-fi look. But for Prowse, that panel functioned strictly as an instrument of pain. The internal wiring would frequently pinch his ribs whenever he leaned forward or twisted his torso, sending sharp jabs of pain through him that he had to suffer in silence while acting. That thick wool cape might have looked majestic on camera, but it trapped body heat like a personal sauna. It turned an already oppressive costume into an unbearable sweatbox under the scorching hot studio lights. Prowse's breathing became severely laboured inside that rigid mask, which muffled his voice so badly that James Earl Jones had to dub every single line in post-production. The irony of the whole situation was absolutely devastating. Here was an actor hired specifically for his massive physical presence, rendered voiceless by the very outfit that made his character a legend. Between takes, Prowse was totally dependent on assistants to pop the helmet off just so he could gasp for air and escape the claustrophobia of being sealed inside. During the action sequences, the armour was so stiff that it led to repeated on-set injuries. Prowse dealt with bruised shoulders and scraped elbows constantly because the rigid suit made it impossible to move naturally or protect himself during fight choreography. The awkward weight distribution caused chronic lower back issues that stuck with him. These injuries plagued him for years, long after the movies were in the can, and the psychological toll was just as heavy. Prowse later described feeling like a prisoner in that suit, cut off from any real human connection and reduced to a mechanical prop that served the film's visuals while his comfort was ignored. The very same suit that established Darth Vader as an icon of evil also turned David Prowse's daily grind into a form of systematic punishment. The cruelest part of Prowse's situation was that his physical suffering was completely invisible to the millions of fans who only saw the imposing Sith Lord. His struggle to breathe, his restricted movement, and his obvious discomfort actually made the character seem more menacing and robotic. This means that Prowse's genuine pain was a direct ingredient in making Vader such an effective villain on the big screen. The torture inflicted by the costume became an essential part of the performance, blurring the reality between the actor and the monster. It worked out great for the movie, but it destroyed Prowse's physical well-being in the process. Now for story number 6, Superman, the hero's hidden agony. Christopher Reeve's transformation into the Man of Steel meant enduring daily torture disguised as a heroic costume fitting. That bright blue spandex that cemented Superman as a beacon of hope was actually a sweat-soaked prison cell for the actor. It caused severe skin damage and led to chronic physical issues throughout the filming of the entire Superman franchise. The suit was stitched together from a nylon and lycra blend, designed to look seamless and sleek under the high-definition film lights. But that non-breathable fabric created a humid greenhouse effect, trapping moisture right against Reeve's skin for 12 hours at a time. The constant dampness resulted in nasty rashes right along the seams where the fabric dug into his body. It left painful red welts that the makeup department had to furiously cover up whenever Clark Kent had a shirtless scene. Just changing out of the outfit became a daily ordeal that could drag on for 20 minutes as Reeve fought to peel off the damp, tight-fitting gear. By the end of a long shooting day, the costume was so fused to his body with sweat that removing it was like shedding a second skin, often ripping off patches of irritated flesh with it. They had to go through multiple versions of the suit because they became absolutely disgusting. They had to constantly rotate the suits because the intense sweat buildup rendered them completely unusable after only a couple of hours on set. That iconic S shield on his chest was crafted from hard rubberized vinyl, creating a stiff torso piece that made simply leaning back or getting into flying positions incredibly awkward and painful. When you mix that unyielding stiffness with the wire harnesses, it created intense pressure points all over his body. It got so bad that Christopher Reeve actually ended up with permanent scarring across his chest and shoulders. Because the suit was so restrictive, he was forced to hold a perfect posture constantly, which led to severe chronic back strain, and don't even get me started on the nightmare that was the red cape. Even when it was bone dry, the thing weighed 3 pounds. But once the special effects crew turned on the rain or mist machines, it soaked up water like a sponge and practically doubled in weight. Since the cape was anchored right at the shoulders, it generated a relentless downward drag that never let up. To fight that drag, Reeve had to constantly arch his spine, a habit that triggered frequent agonising lower back spasms that actually required medical intervention. Whenever they filmed those groundbreaking flying scenes that defined the franchise, Reeve was strung up in the air for hours. He was locked into harnesses that ground against the costume, creating friction burns, chafing, and even more excruciating pressure points. Between the suffocating suit, the heavy cape, and the torturous flying rig, Reeve was enduring a perfect storm of agony, all while having to smile and project the ultimate confidence of the Man of Steel. The mental toll of wearing that suit was just as complicated and disturbing as the physical side. Sure, on the outside, it transformed him into a global symbol of hope and heroism. But the daily reality of that pain created a jarring disconnect between the character's invincibility and the actor's very real, human vulnerability. Reeve eventually confessed that some of his most inspiring and powerful takes happened while he was in significant physical distress. It is a cruel twist of irony that the world symbol of invincibility was played by a man whose own supersuit was systematically breaking down his body. To the fans, those bright colours and that sleek design were the ultimate representation of Superman's strength and optimism. But for Christopher Reeve, putting that thing on was a daily reminder of the brutal physical toll required to bring the world's most famous superhero to life. The audience never saw the suffering. All we saw was the embodiment of hope saving the day. Meanwhile, the man underneath the spandex was paying a physical price that lingered long after the director yelled cut. Moving on to story number 7, let's talk about Cleopatra, or as I call it, the costume bankruptcy. Elizabeth Taylor's wardrobe demands didn't just rack up the most expensive costume bill in movie history. They nearly drove 20th Century Fox into the ground and exposed the devastating human cost of unchecked Hollywood ego, even though the wardrobe budget was just one slice of the film's catastrophic financial pie. Taylor's outrageous demands and the production's total chaos whipped up a perfect storm that completely destroyed careers and livelihoods. Get this, Taylor's contract legally guaranteed her a staggering 65 costume changes throughout the movie. And every single one of them had to be more lavish and expensive than anything Tinseltown had ever seen before. The costume department, headed up by designer Irene Sharaff, was stitching gowns with literal gold thread imported all the way from Italy. They used real precious gems and fabrics that cost more per yard than the average American family took home in a month. That famous golden dress alone took Italian seamstresses over 3,000 hours to hand stitch, and they decked it out with genuine emeralds and sapphires. But the real scandal here wasn't just the obscene amount of money being burned. It was the intense physical toll these heavy, elaborate costumes took on Taylor herself. Those golden robes and massive headdresses were so incredibly heavy that Taylor reportedly battled chronic migraines and severe neck strain for the entire shoot. Some of the gowns were made with such rigid beading and metal thread that they scraped her skin raw, requiring extra padding just to prevent permanent scars. She actually needed a team of assistants just to help her walk onto the set while wearing some of these monstrosities. The fittings themselves turned into massive dramatic productions. Taylor kept making increasingly impossible demands that sent the budget spiralling way past the point of no return. She insisted that all her jewellery be made with real diamonds and stones because she claimed she could feel the difference on camera. She also demanded multiple versions of every single costume in different sizes since her weight was fluctuating during the endless troubled production. If she didn't like how a dress looked in a photo, she would demand it be scrapped and completely remade, totally ignoring the time and money already wasted. But the human cost became truly devastating as the production dragged on and the bills piled up. While Taylor was getting fitted for million-dollar gowns, 20th Century Fox was firing hundreds of employees in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. Skilled craftsmen who had built sets for legendary films were suddenly out on the street. At the same time, seamstresses were being worked to the bone around the clock just to satisfy Taylor's endless wardrobe whims. Entire families lost their livelihoods just so one actress could indulge in her most extravagant fantasies. Then the production moving from London to Rome just threw more fuel on the fire, creating even more insane costume expenses and complications. Liz Taylor's terrifying battle with pneumonia didn't just shut down the set for weeks. It was fueled by those insanely heavy restrictive costumes that made it impossible for her to catch her breath or regulate her body heat. Make no mistake, the sickness that almost took her life was directly tied to the brutal physical toll those outfits took on her system. Every inch of that glamorous, elaborate wardrobe was piling massive amounts of dangerous stress onto her already weakened body. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Cleopatra had racked up a bill of $44 million a number that was practically unheard of at the time. Even though the official wardrobe budget was supposed to be under $200,000, the ripple effect of Taylor's demands and the massive delays they caused pushed 20th Century Fox right to the edge of total bankruptcy. The financial bleeding was so bad that the studio had no choice but to sell off their prized backlot in Century City to real estate developers just to keep the lights on. It was a desperate fire sale, completely necessary to survive the absolute financial train wreck that the production of Cleopatra had turned into. But here is the kicker: the real victims weren't Liz Taylor or the suits in the boardroom who signed off on her excess. Those guys kept living the high life long after the movie hit theatres. No, the people who really paid the price were the everyday working families who lost their jobs, their homes and their entire futures because of the studio's mismanagement. While Taylor was playing dress-up in gowns that cost more than a regular crew member would earn in 3 lifetimes, the little guys were getting crushed. A film that was meant to showcase the majesty of ancient Egypt ended up becoming a dark symbol of modern Hollywood's cold-hearted indifference to the human cost of fame. Sure, Cleopatra eventually made its money back through global ticket sales, but the scar left on 20th Century Fox was deep and permanent. The studio never really got back on solid financial ground, and a lot of those loyal employees who were laid off during the chaos never found work in this town again. Those shimmering golden costumes stopped being about cinematic artistry or historical accuracy. Instead, they became the ultimate symbol of a ruthless industry willing to sacrifice absolutely anything and anyone just for the sake of spectacle and a star's massive ego. So there you have it, 7 legendary costumes, 7 devastating scandals, and 1 undeniable pattern exposing the rotten core of Hollywood's entertainment machine. We are talking about the Tin Man's toxic silver coating that nearly killed Buddy Ebsen, which the studio tried to sweep under the rug as a simple allergic reaction. The famous ruby slippers kicking up asbestos snow, a toxic mix that likely played a huge role in Judy Garland's lifelong health nightmares. That suffocating gold paint that sealed up Shirley Eaton's pores, nearly choking the life out of her for one single flashy scene in a Bond movie. The brutal steel corsets Mae West was strapped into, which were so tight they had to be cut off her body just to keep her from passing out cold. The iconic white subway dress, engineered specifically to humiliate Marilyn Monroe publicly, while powerful men cashed in on her degradation. The Darth Vader suit that turned David Prowse into a daily torture victim, and the Superman spandex that left Christopher Reeves sweating, scarred and suffering behind that heroic smile. And finally, the Cleopatra wardrobe, so exorbitantly expensive and demanding that it helped bankrupt a major studio while working-class families lost everything they had. These weren't just unhappy accidents, minor oversights, or the unavoidable cost of making movie magic happen. These were cold, calculated choices made by an industry that decided a flashy spectacle was worth more than human dignity, health, or basic safety protocols. The old studio system didn't just manufacture dreams for the silver screen. It manufactured systematic cruelty on an industrial scale, then spent decades burying the evidence with threats, hush-money settlements, and carefully spun lies. The most heartbreaking truth of all is that these costumes became legendary specifically because of the intense suffering that went into making and wearing them. It seems like the more dangerous the materials were, the more exploitative the entire process became. And the more physically punishing the experience was for the actor, the more iconic and celebrated the costume became in pop culture history. We have been celebrating our own complicity in this system of abuse for nearly a century now, often without even realising it. We turn real human suffering into box office entertainment while the victims are forced to stay silent, gagged by ironclad contracts and threats of career suicide if they ever speak up. That is the real dark secret lurking behind Hollywood's most famous wardrobe choices. They were built on a foundation of exploitation that the industry tried to hide for years. Behind every shimmering gown, every perfect silhouette, and every unforgettable cinematic moment you see on screen, there was a steep human cost that powerful executives were all too willing to pay, using other people's lives, health, and dignity as currency. If this deep dive opened your eyes to the gritty reality behind the glamour of Hollywood, go ahead and smash that like button right now. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any more shocking revelations about the entertainment industry's shadowy history. Drop a comment down below and let me know which of these costume horror stories shocked you the most. Was it the Tin Man's toxic poisoning, the exploitation of the subway dress, or the suffocation risk of the gold paint? Thanks for hanging out with me today, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful costumes are hiding the absolute ugliest truths.